The rain had been falling for hours, drumming against the glass windows of St. Mary's Hospital like a relentless warning. Inside, the corridors smelled of antiseptic and faintly of coffee, the kind of scent that clung to every corner of late-night hospital shifts. Nurse Angela Carter, a woman in her early 30s with steady hands and tired eyes, walked briskly through the ward. She had seen countless emergencies, but something about this night felt different. There was a tension in the air, an unease that no one spoke of but everyone could feel. Angela pushed open the heavy double doors leading to the emergency room, and her gaze immediately fell upon a new patient who had just been wheeled in. He was an elderly man, pale and frail, his breathing shallow yet steady. His clothes were plain, his presence quiet, almost too quiet, as though he carried secrets with him. She checked his chart and noticed something odd. The man had no listed family contacts, just a name that didn't seem familiar to anyone on staff. Despite her exhaustion, Angela greeted him with a warm, professional smile. "Good evening, sir. I'm Nurse Carter. I'll be taking care of you tonight." Her voice was calm, comforting, the way she always spoke to patients. The old man tilted his head slightly, his tired eyes scanning her face, as though weighing her character before replying. But he said nothing. He simply watched her in silence while she adjusted the monitors, making sure his vitals were stable. The hum of machines filled the room, and outside the thunder cracked again, sending a low vibration through the building. Angela noted his weak pulse, the signs of fatigue in his frame, and wondered silently what had brought him here so late at night. He didn't fit the usual picture of an emergency patient. There were no visible injuries, no sudden collapse, just a quiet arrival with an unspoken story. She felt the weight of his silence pressing against her, but she pushed it aside, focusing on her duty. As she worked, Angela didn't notice the looming shadow approaching from the doorway. Dr. William Harris, TARP, featured, and known for his arrogance, had just entered the room. His polished shoes clicked against the tile floor, his presence immediately commanding attention. Angela kept her focus on the patient, unaware that the storm outside was nothing compared to the storm about to erupt within these hospital walls. Dr. William Harris didn't waste a second before asserting his presence. He strode into the ward with his usual air of superiority, his white coat swaying behind him like a cape. The air seemed to grow colder the moment he entered. Without even glancing at the frail patient lying in the bed, his sharp eyes locked onto Nurse Angela. His lips curled into a condescending smirk, as though simply seeing her at the bedside was already a mistake. "Carter," he barked, his voice cutting through the silence like a whip. "Are you seriously checking vitals like that? How many years have you been in this hospital, and you still don't know the basics?" His tone was dripping with disdain, loud enough for everyone in the room, including the patient, to hear. Angela froze for a split second, her cheeks burning, but forced herself to remain calm. She quietly checked the monitor to ensure she hadn't missed anything, though she already knew she hadn't. The humiliation didn't stop there. Harris stepped closer, towering over her, his words growing sharper with every breath. "Honestly, I don't know why they continue to keep you here. You're slow, you're careless, and let's be honest, you'll never rise above being a nurse." He deliberately lowered his voice at that last remark, but the sting of his words carried louder than any shout. The other staff members standing nearby shifted uncomfortably, their eyes darting between Angela and the patient, too afraid to intervene. Angela swallowed hard, forcing herself to keep working. Every instinct inside her screamed to defend herself, but she knew Harris's reputation. He was untouchable, shielded by years of seniority and the hospital's politics. To argue back would only give him more ammunition. So, she pressed her lips together and focused on adjusting the IV line, her silence becoming both her shield and her punishment. Still, the weight of his words pressed against her chest, making every movement feel heavier than it should. All the while, the old man on the bed remained perfectly still, his eyes never leaving the scene. His gaze was steady, unwavering, as if he were studying every detail of this cruel exchange. There was no anger in his expression, no sympathy either, just a strange, calculating calmness. It was as if he had seen such injustice before and was waiting, biding his time, to reveal something no one in the room could possibly expect. As Dr. Harris's cutting words lingered in the air, the room fell into a heavy silence. The fluorescent lights flickered above, humming softly, while the only other sound was the steady beeping of the heart monitor. Most patients in that situation would have looked away in discomfort or spoken up to defend the nurse. But the frail old man lying on the bed did neither. His thin lips curled slightly, almost into a faint smile, as if the humiliation unfolding before him was nothing more than an act in a play he had seen many times before. Angela couldn't help but notice the way his eyes followed her. They weren't the tired, distracted eyes of an ordinary patient. Instead, they were piercing, sharp and aware, with a strange glimmer that unsettled her. It felt as though every movement she made, every breath she took, was being weighed and measured by him. Despite the shame she felt under Dr. Harris's attack, Angela sensed something in the patient's expression that kept her steady, as though he were silently telling her not to break. Dr. Harris, however, remained oblivious. He scribbled angrily onto the patient's chart, muttering insults about incompetence and lack of discipline, all while the patient lay motionless, observing. The old man's calmness was unnatural. It wasn't the kind of passive quiet born from fear or weakness. No, his silence carried weight, authority even, as if he knew that time would reveal truths the arrogant doctor could never see. Angela tried to focus on her work, but the atmosphere was suffocating. The patient's eyes never left her, and the more she noticed, the more unsettled she became. It was as though he wasn't just watching her actions. He was studying her character, testing her resolve. And though he hadn't spoken a single word yet, his presence felt louder than Harris's insults. The tension grew unbearable. Angela finally met the old man's gaze, searching for something, pity, comfort, or even disapproval. But what she found instead was a quiet intensity that sent a chill down her spine. He seemed to know more than he was letting on, as if the entire humiliating encounter had been meant for his eyes, as though he were silently storing it away for a reckoning that was yet to come. When the storm of insults finally died down, Dr. Harris snapped the patient's chart shut, and stormed out of the ward without so much as a glance at the man lying in the bed. The echo of his polished shoes faded down the hallway, leaving behind an almost eerie silence. Angela exhaled slowly, her shoulders trembling from the effort of holding herself together. For a moment, she thought she was alone with her thoughts. But then a soft, gravelly voice broke through the stillness. "Don't let arrogance take root in your heart," the patient whispered, his voice weak but strangely steady. Angela turned sharply, surprised that he had spoken at all. His eyes were open now, fully focused on her, carrying a weight that seemed far heavier than his frail body suggested. Men like him, they shout because they fear silence. They belittle because they fear truth. Angela froze, caught off guard by the wisdom in his words. They weren't the casual reassurances of a patient trying to comfort a nurse. No, his tone was deliberate, almost prophetic, as though each syllable was chosen with precision. She felt a strange shiver crawl up her spine, not from fear, but from the uncanny sense that this man knew something more, something she couldn't yet see. For a long moment, the only sounds were the beeping of the monitor, and the distant rumble of thunder. Angela tried to find the right words to respond, but none came. She simply stood there, staring at him, feeling as though his warning was not just about Dr. Harris, but about something far greater, something that was about to unfold. The old man, however, said nothing more. He simply closed his eyes again, as if satisfied he had planted the seed he intended. Angela gently adjusted the blanket over him, her hands trembling slightly. She had tended to thousands of patients in her career, but never had she encountered one whose silence carried such weight, or whose few words struck so deeply. As she moved away from his bedside, she couldn't shake the feeling that his calmness wasn't resignation, it was patience. He was waiting. For what? She didn't know yet. But something told her that this quiet warning was only the beginning of a storm far more dangerous than the one raging outside. The next morning, the hospital buzzed with unusual activity. Angela noticed it the moment she stepped back into the ward, administrators rushing through hallways, hushed phone calls being made behind closed doors, and security guards stationed at entrances where none had stood the night before. Something was happening, something big, and yet no one dared to speak openly about it. She glanced at her patient, the frail old man from the night before, who now seemed even more composed, as though the chaos surrounding him had been carefully orchestrated. Angela's curiosity grew when she saw the hospital director himself, Mr. Collins, step into the ward accompanied by a group of sharply dressed officials. This was a man who rarely appeared on the floors, unless there was a crisis, and now he was moving with uncharacteristic urgency. His eyes immediately locked onto the patient's bed, and his stiff posture softened into a rare display of respect. Angela frowned. Why was the director treating this anonymous patient with such gravity? Before she could process it, Mr. Collins leaned close to the bed and addressed the old man by a different name. Judge Samuel Bryant. The words echoed in Angela's mind. She recognized the name instantly. Judge Bryant was no ordinary figure. He was one of the most powerful federal judges in the country, a man whose rulings had shaped laws and whose reputation for integrity was known nationwide. To think he was lying here in her ward, disguised under a false name, sent a chill racing through her veins. Angela quickly realized the implications. This wasn't just a patient who had witnessed Dr. Harris's cruel tirade. This was a man with the authority to alter careers, reputations, even lives, with the stroke of a pen. She glanced at him again, seeing him now not as a frail old man, but as a silent observer who had deliberately allowed events to unfold without revealing his hand. It wasn't weakness that had kept him quiet the night before, it was choice. The weight of this revelation pressed down on Angela. The patient who had quietly endured Dr. Harris's arrogance was, in truth, the one man no doctor in their right mind would ever dare insult. Judge Bryant's identity explained everything: his calm demeanor, his piercing eyes, his cryptic warning. He wasn't just resting in that hospital bed, he was watching, recording, waiting for the exact moment to reveal himself. And when that moment came, Angela knew, the entire hospital would feel the consequences. When the news of Judge Bryant's true identity spread through the hospital, whispers rippled across every floor like a current of electricity. Nurses exchanged stunned glances, doctors stiffened nervously, and administrators scrambled to fix their behavior retroactively, afraid of what might come. But the one person who seemed completely unaware of the storm building was Dr. William Harris. He walked down the corridor with his usual arrogance, carrying himself as if the hospital itself belonged to him, still convinced that his authority was untouchable. Judge Bryant, however, had not forgotten. Later that afternoon, he requested Dr. Harris to report directly to his room. The request came not through the usual hospital channels, but through the director himself. A move that should have warned Harris something was different. Yet Harris smirked, mistaking it for recognition of his seniority. Finally, he muttered to a junior doctor, "They're realizing who keeps this place running." With that same inflated pride, he pushed open the door to the ward where his patient was waiting. The atmosphere inside was unlike anything Harris had expected. Instead of the submissive old man he had dismissed the night before, Judge Bryant was sitting upright in his bed, his frail frame now cloaked in an unmistakable aura of authority. His eyes, sharp and unwavering, locked onto Harris the moment he entered. For the first time in years, Harris faltered, his rehearsed arrogance clashing against an authority far greater than his own. The silence in the room was suffocating, broken only by the faint tick of the wall clock. "Dr. Harris," Judge Bryant said at last, his voice calm but weighted with iron. "I listened to every word you spoke yesterday. I watched how you treated those around you. Your arrogance, your cruelty, your disregard for dignity, they were on full display." Harris blinked, caught off guard, his mouth opening slightly as though to protest, but no words came out. It was dawning on him now, too late, that this was not a patient to belittle, but a man who had the power to strip him of everything he held dear. The judge's words were not loud, yet they carried the force of a gavel striking wood. "This hospital is meant to heal, not to humiliate. You believe your title shields you, but in truth, it exposes you." Harris shifted uncomfortably, his arrogance draining with every passing second. The staff who had gathered outside the door could hear enough to understand what was happening. The untouchable Dr. Harris was being dismantled, not with anger, but with justice. The tension in the room was unbearable as Judge Bryant's words cut deeper than any scalpel. Dr. Harris stood frozen, his face pale, the usual smirk gone. For years, he had believed himself immune to consequences, untouchable within the walls of St. Mary's Hospital. But now, confronted by the one man whose judgment could not be escaped, Harris's mask began to crack. The silence that followed was louder than his earlier insults, wrapping around him like chains he couldn't break free from. Finally, Judge Bryant spoke again, his tone unshaken. "Medicine is not about power, it is about service. You stripped this woman of her dignity in front of me, and in doing so, you revealed your own weakness." He shifted his gaze toward Angela, who stood just inside the doorway, her hands clenched nervously. His eyes softened as he added, "Strength is not measured by the volume of your voice, doctor, but by the compassion in your actions." The words struck the room like thunder, a truth that could not be ignored. Harris tried to protest, his voice trembling. "With respect, Judge, you misunderstand." But the words faltered, collapsing under the weight of his own guilt. Everyone in the room could see it. The once commanding doctor was unraveling, his authority slipping through his fingers. He looked smaller now, diminished not by age or sickness, but by his own cruelty being laid bare before an audience he could no longer intimidate. Judge Bryant's verdict was swift but devastating. "You will no longer serve in this hospital. Your arrogance has no place where lives are at stake." His tone was steady, final, as though he were pronouncing a sentence in his courtroom. The declaration carried through the halls, reaching the ears of the staff who had once feared Harris. Whispers spread quickly. The doctor who had humiliated countless colleagues was finally facing consequences none of them had dared to imagine. Angela, still silent, felt a wave of emotions she couldn't name: vindication, relief, but also an unease that clung to her skin. She hadn't expected justice to come so swiftly, and yet the way it unfolded left her shaken. Judge Bryant's eyes lingered on her once more, his voice dropping into something almost haunting. Never forget, Nurse Carter, true power reveals itself not in how we treat the strong, but in how we treat those we think cannot fight back. His words sank deep into her, a lesson she knew would echo long after Harris was gone. The ward stood in complete silence as Judge Bryant leaned back against his pillow, his strength visibly waning yet his authority unshaken. Dr. Harris lowered his head, the weight of his downfall pressing harder than any illness ever could. Without another word, he turned and walked out of the room, his once commanding footsteps now hollow, stripped of pride and certainty. Angela remained by the bedside, still processing the whirlwind of events. Judge Bryant's gaze found hers again, and this time, his voice was gentler, almost fatherly. "You endured humiliation with dignity. That speaks louder than any title." A faint smile tugged at his lips before he closed his eyes, signaling the conversation was over. In that moment, Angela realized the truth: justice doesn't always arrive in the courtroom. Sometimes it arrives quietly, in unexpected places, even in a hospital ward on a stormy night. And for Dr. Harris, the storm had only just begun. Angela straightened her posture, her heart heavier but stronger, knowing the lesson would stay with her forever. The measure of a person is never in how they command respect, but in how they give it.
If you liked this video, don't forget to hit that like button, share it with your friends, and drop your thoughts in the comments below. Most importantly, subscribe and hit the bell icon so the next secret finds you first.